Hey everyone, welcome to The Flip Side with your hosts Chris and Sean.
We're a podcast rambling about the interesting questions in the world of movement. Welcome back to The Flip Side. Today we are going to be talking about how to progress past plateaus at all levels. So like when you first start out, when you become a beginner, when you become intermediate, when you get to advanced, how do you make those jumps through tricking? And then Sean's going to be talking about how to make those same progressions, but in gymnastics. And we're going to see how much, how similar they are, but also how different they are. And maybe we can draw from gymnastics and learn from them. Maybe gymnastics can draw and learn from tricking. We're just going to see what the differences are. And hopefully this helps you guys get past your plateaus.
Yeah, because I definitely think there is mindsets and a lot of things that we can take from tricking. And I think tricking might have one or two things that they could probably take from gymnastics just in general of how we think about things and go about things. I really think this will be a good episode.
Yeah, I definitely think that we can learn from each other. All right, so let's get started right away. In tricking, when you first start out, right, you are, for me, let's pretend, for me, I started with no base. So let's pretend you started with no base. You didn't know martial arts or anything. I'm going to tell you that the number one things you're going to need are flexibility, strength, and then the mental understanding of the sport. When like you're lacking this flexibility for the kicks, you're lacking the flexibility to be reaching for the floor, and then you're lacking the understanding of how tricking actually works. Maybe you've seen tricking before, but it's like you probably don't understand the difference between a B twist, swing cork, swing dub versus a double B twist, tack full, swing dub. It might look the same to you. You might not notice the tack in there. You might not notice that extra twist in the double B twist. It just goes so quick. And even if you do notice it, you might not respect it as much as it deserves to be respected. So that's where tramp comes in, is getting that mental understanding of what the tricks are actually doing and why like a double B twist is harder than a double cork, or just why the variations are important to learning that next twist. All these things that give you the air awareness and the ability to start progressing and start even just dabbling in the sport. If you don't have the strength for it, you just physically can't do it. I don't care if you know how a Chi 9 works. Once they tell you how it works and you're like, oh, that makes total sense, and then you try to do it and your body does not cooperate at all, that's because you're just lacking the understanding. So it's literally just learning about all the tricks, learning about how they do it, and then repping them out, using that tramp to really gain the air worms and the understanding of how it works, and then just like really try to get somebody else to trick with. I think that's a really, really big thing.
No, that is. And even going at from a gymnastics standpoint of going to beginning, you have to have at least somewhat of decent flexibility to start out, because if you're not flexible and you're starting some gymnastic skills, it'll be even hard to learn what we consider like a basic is just like a back handspring or what you guys do as a Valdez. I mean, if you can't go through proper positioning, it's going to be hard to transition into other skills. You can't really swing out of it. You can't really punch out of it if you're just getting your feet over your head too fast and then you're piking down super hard, or you're tucking it super hard so you don't have enough lift. And I mean, other things for us, like being able to just touch your toes is huge. I have many gymnasts that I've coached that struggle with touching their toes right away. And you just got to work on flexibility and strength. It's just so important. And just learning how your body feels just even a little bit in the air or on the ground, and how certain positions feel, like hollow or arch. And I know you guys don't really think of like doing hollow, doing arch, doing straight body. It's more somewhat of just a feeling of what your body feels like, but there's no name to what that quote unquote position is beyond just like where your swing leg is and how it feels. But we have those very specific, this is hollow, this is arch, this is straight body, this is what some people call C finish. This is how you land, just so we ingrain that right in the beginning, so then it just translates through the rest of the time.
I think that's really good. Yeah, we have like the names for like the variations. We got like the D leg, the rounds, and stuff like that, and people understand those body positionings. But we don't have names for the stuff like the hollow and the straight body. And I think things like that would be super good, because you're right. People understand it. And when you get good, you're like, oh, I need to set this way for triple cork. And then they do it. But if we could tell people at the beginning, like, this is what a hollow body is, and this is what a block is, and this is why you go high, do
Yeah.
this. Then it's like, oh, there's a name for it. And then now they remember.
Yeah, because your
And
mind
then,
associates with it.
yeah, exactly. And I think that flexibility and the strength is also super, super important when first starting out because it really helps you not get injured. If you,
Mhm.
especially when you're starting because you're not comfortable with the tricks yet. So when you fall, you're gonna fall like bad,
Yeah,
and you don't know. You're just jumping, and you're like, well, I hope my feet come towards the floor, and then they do, and then you're not ready for it because you weren't. You're like, I just hope they do, instead of I'm gonna put them there, and then we'll
that's true.
see if I can control this landing. Or I'm gonna see if it looked the right way from the beginning to the end, and it's just not. It's so much more dangerous. You don't know how to fall. You don't know the skill you're trying to do, and that's why the tramp is the number one thing to just get comfortable and get that mental understanding. And then you once you're past this starting point and you break into the beginner point and you're starting to work on getting comfortable with your tricks, then you can really start throwing yourself around more because you learn how to fall. You learn how to get your feet to the floor. You learn how to slow yourself down when you're twisting. You know how to spot, and you get
Yep.
all this much more information going in, and you have much more control because of that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. So then going from starting to beginning, I really think that biggest difference is really starting to work on those basic skills or that basic skill set you're going to start using to learning bigger flips, bigger twists, bigger tricks, bigger kicks. Because granted, you can do some skills with sloppy basics, but it's better just to start grinding out the basic movements right away, because then when you're starting to do those bigger skills, you're starting to transition into doing double cork or cork snapu or D-leg. Well, I consider D-leg a higher skill because that's I suck. But doing stuff like that, if you don't understand how your body feels while doing just a simple basic movement and then you'd want to do something harder, it's going to feel really out of whack. Even if you have
Yeah.
really great spatial awareness, you have to understand what it feels like and what it's supposed to be doing and the point of that.
Yeah, I think
Basic.
that totally comes back to the comfortability aspect of it. It's like if you can kind of B kick and now you're trying to B twist, then if you weren't comfortable with your B kick to make it super sharp and you can't B twist knife or you can't like butterfly switch,
Yep.
then like you're not comfortable in the air and you're not comfortable with that takeoff. So how are you going to add a twist? The twist is like that is harder. It's just that's just what you want,
Yeah.
instead. But it's harder than those other skills. So you should touch on those other skills first because they're harder to get hurt on than a
Mhm.
twist is because your back is facing the floor during that, or you're upside down depending on how you're doing it. So
Yeah, because there's
much
that one
more
time where you're
difficult.
not looking at the ground. And you
Right.
have to be comfortable not looking at the ground. And that is one thing that is innately kind of scary right at the beginning. Like you're not seeing 100% where you're going. Like if you're twisting over, there's a point where you're seeing the ceiling or you're looking at something else and you can't quite look at the floor for a very split second. And your body tends to not like that. And that's one thing that I try to instill with a lot of the gymnasts that I coach is don't be afraid of falling, because falling is what's going to help you progress and help learn. Because granted, it's going to teach you fear is okay, because fear is there to keep you safe, but you have to be able to work over fear of just flipping over your head, not being able to see the floor 100% of the time. You have to trust yourself.
Yeah. Could you run through a couple of if you were starting gymnastics, like just starting, you've never done it before, whether you're 4 years old or whether you're like 14 years old, what are some starting skills before you became a beginner that could actually run through a class? Like if you were doing a private lesson starting out, what would you teach these kids on a couple of events?
A couple really important skills, just to me specifically. Floor, there's a cartwheel, a round off, and a back limber where you kick over both feet at the same time instead of doing a bridge kick over, because that leads bigger into doing a back handspring than just a bridge kick over. And then doing it the opposite way where you kick in a handstand, fall to bridge, and are able to stand up with both your hands coming up, because that leads
Wow.
into front pulling. Like
And is
those
that
are
totally women's gymnastics or is that men's too? They make them do that.
that's too. That's what I learned right
Wow.
away. because it's hugely important because like doing a back limber and then kicking over, I mean, a back handspring is literally that small component, except that you jump through it. And then a front handspring is pretty much the same thing. You push into your hands and then push up to stand, trying to keep your hands up. So if you could do it from a static movement, it's going to be a lot easier when you just add a little bit of momentum.
That makes me think that I'm so much better at the momentum side of it than I am at the like physical mobility side of it. Like I could not do that now. I don't think I could do either one of those now. It's so funny that that's a starting move, but it makes sense because that's the very base of gymnastics. That's just what you do. Versus in tricking, I'll go over a couple of the starting tricks that I always start people out with. That would just be B kick, it would be scoot, it would be tornado kick, it would be hook kick. And once you have those, you can start playing with connecting them also. And then maybe backside 9 or frontside 360 round and pop 360 are really good ones. I also teach cheat 3. So you do it's like a fei long kick, but you don't throw the round kick because it just teaches them to drive that outside leg. And I think all of those kind of hit they hit the basic movements of everything. It's like how to drive the outside leg, how to throw a round kick and not drive the outside leg, how to throw up the B kick versus like a gainer. You could do like a swing B kick. I usually teach that from the scoot when I teach them the scoot. So just like, yeah, like it just hits every sort of, like I would say, almost like in gymnastics, the events, you got the swing kick, you got the vanish, you got the pop, like it just hits every stance, every takeoff point, every, at least to start out.
Yeah, another skill I wanted to add really quick was just doing a nice solid handstand, holding at least 3 seconds ish. Like that is a solid starting point because you do a handstand every event. You do it through God knows how many skills starting out.
Roundhouse, back handsprings, everything. I would have laughed at you. I would have laughed at you for saying that before. I would have been like, oh, this guy, I mean, like, wow, he's so like, and I'm so superior because what is a handstand for?
Oh, I know.
But I started taking the tumbling classes and now I understand. So because I took those classes, I 100% agree with it because it's like it completely changed my tumbling for the better.
Oh, I know. Because, you hit that position through so many things, especially even going forward once we get there. Handstand becomes vitally important. And beyond just a handstand for beginner tricks, beginner skills, I would be working on that. I would be working on back handspring, a really solid round off, being able to even do a pull over and a back hip circle on bars would really help. Being able to kick to a handstand on the beam and be able to actually get up to a full handstand is huge. And even just doing what I like to call a pop-up on the vault table, that you have to have an aggressive run, really nice hurdle, really long hurdle, and just a really nice tight hollow with a good arm swing off the board. Those are just key little components of just women's gymnastics, at least, of artistic. And men's artistic, you got to learn how to swing and do tap swings really well. You got to learn how to do a tap swing on rings, parallel bars, just being able to do a press handstand. Like they seem so minuscule at the time, but when you're learning them, it is rough right at the beginning, but they're so important.
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And just for anyone who doesn't understand how vital the handstand is, I wanted to go over a little bit. Like when you're in your handstand, you're so tight and tall, and you're balancing at this balance point. And when you are doing like a back handspring or a round off or hitting the vault table with your hands or doing like anything like a giant or anything, you just have to understand what it's like to be there so that when you're there, you have control and power. If you don't understand what position you're trying to find upside down, you're going to try to apply force and power to a point that isn't strong. So that's what that balance point is really for. So it's like, I didn't understand that before. And I just like, it kind of geeks me out. Like understanding that when you were explaining it. So that's pretty cool. For the beginner tricker skills, I think adding a twist to everything that you kind of learned is a really good starting point because I think this is the hardest point for everyone because it's such a big jump. Like when you're starting out and you're like learning, the tornado kick and the B kick and everything, and they're not pretty. They're not going to be pretty. So beginners really like making them prettier, comfortable with, maybe starting out you could do a B kick and then check that you're in the right position. You're just doing them and you're trying to make it faster. You're trying not to touch your knees to the floor. You're trying to have that momentum carry through and not pause for each skill, like have some sort of connection. So I think that's the biggest thing for beginner is just the connection aspect of it. But this is where you start adding twists. But that pretty much happens on the tramp.
Yeah.
And then you have to take it from tramp to floor also. So I would say you can start working stuff like partial twists. So like gainer and gainer hook, doing stuff like B twist because it can relate to backside 9 and tornado. I think B twist is a really, really good one to learn first because you can play with it and it's safe to make it vertical. It's safe to make it horizontal. It's safe to add things like illusion twist which is like a pop 3, but like from a B twist setup. So things like that, where it's like the chances of getting hurt are very minuscule. The understanding it gives you is huge when you're trying to finally learn the twisting aspect of it. So yeah, and then once you learn that gainer hook, pulling that hook leg to the floor to make it a cork, turning that into a crescent, so it's like cork illusion instead of B twist illusion, and then taking that illusion and turning it into that full twist, you should be just about there, and that is going to take forever. And then even in beginner, I would say you're still a beginner if you are working on like full swipe on the floor. So but like there's just this huge gap you have to cover. The hardest gap is that stuff I just covered. Learning the small variations, the small minuscule twists. Once you get the full twist and once you get the full hyper, now you can play games on tramp with dubs. Now you can play with the dubs on tramp, and then you get comfortable on floor. Once you're there, you're ready to go into intermediate. That's the biggest. Beginner is the biggest gap for tricking, especially now, because before when I started out, like cork was intermediate, and even dubs were advanced. But nowadays people are doing the quad corks and the cork-ins and doing cheat 12s, and if you're not doing that stuff, like, I mean, I don't know really, because on my Instagram the only people I follow are people who can do the biggest skills, because that's what I want to compare myself to. I don't want to look at someone doing cheat 9 hook sideswipe TDR double cork. It's awesome, but it's like it's I don't want to do that myself and be like, mine looked cleaner than his, so I'm happy with it. I want to be like, oh, it wasn't a triple cork.
Yeah.
Like, I want to look at the Instagram and be like, they did cheat 9, cheat 12, hook, B twist, G switch, triple cork. That's what I need to be doing. So instead, I just want to be able to push myself instead of be okay with where I'm at. So that's what I think is also a really good thing with the beginners is don't surround yourself with starting, and don't teach other people also.
Yeah.
You really want to teach people, but you don't have a good enough understanding to teach them. And you're also just hurting yourself by trying to teach them. You just need to take that time and perfect your stuff and play with people that are at a higher level than you. I think that's the biggest thing for the beginner. I didn't want to spend that much time on the beginner, but it's really the biggest. It's the biggest category of all of them. So jumping into intermediate, let's have you start off again. What are some intermediate skills like, and how do you start attaining those in gymnastics?
So for gymnastics, in my opinion, one of the bigger hurdles is going from beginner to intermediate, because by the time you're really going intermediate is when you're starting to learn twisting on floor, or you're starting to do giants on bars. You're starting to do clear hip handstands on bars. You're starting to do back handsprings on beam. You're doing flip vaults like Sukaharas or your Chankos, hand fronts on vaults. Like that, to me, is getting to intermediate level. And I mean, that's a huge step from, if I'm thinking, well, beginner was just getting a really solid round off, a really nice back handspring, a decent front handspring, just doing a pull over back hip circle. But intermediate, especially now looking at how much gymnastics has progressed and how fast people have to progress, it really is just a massive jump all of a sudden to intermediate, to being what intermediate is considered now. Because those are skills that are level 6, level 7, where you have up to level 10 and then elite in college. And level 6, level 7 is right in the middle. That's intermediate. And those are skills that you're working on in intermediate.
Yeah, and there's like the connections. The connections are so much harder. And like you necessarily weren't connecting the round up back handspring, were you in beginner level, or are you?
You're starting to work on it, but you're not really proficient at it. It's usually pretty, I shouldn't say sloppy, and I shouldn't say ugly, although I use those words a lot. It's loose. It's not really tight yet. You're just kind of figuring it out. But once you're transitioning into going intermediate level, quote unquote, you really have to have a nice, solid round off back handspring, front handspring, a really nice cast on bars, just a solid kip cast, trying to get to that handstand position. I mean, you got to be able to move fast and know how to stay tight through everything. Because if you can't,
So saying you were saying you were working on twisting though. So do you necessarily need to have like back handspring full, round off back handspring full on floor also?
Yep.
Okay,
Like,
all right.
that is like that is starting to be like intermediate, where like cork for you guys is kind of beginner. Starting back twisting and doing back full or back half is starting intermediate just for us on floor. And then beyond there, it starts to take a little bit bigger of a jump, but it doesn't feel as big of a jump from intermediate to advanced. Intermediate from beginner is just a huge gap. And it looks really huge, especially when you're in level 4, level 5, because you're starting to look at some of those skills. You're like, oh, this is like the way more advanced version of what I'm just learning.
I bet that's hella intimidating.
Like 1 to 2 years, you're supposed to pretty much be at that level. It's kind of what I expected. And
that sounds so intimidating.
And you gotta get more flexible, you gotta get stronger, because your body has to keep up. And looking at it from beginner, you're like, oh man, like if my splits aren't down all the way, like it's fine right now. But once you get up to that, you're like, oh, well, my splits need to be all the way down, because then my legs can go through the correct positioning when I'm doing a straddle cast handstand, or when I'm doing switch leap. I need to get 180. And if I can't get 180, I get huge deductions. So like I need to get those things, and to hit correct positions, you have to be really strong and confident. And I mean, that's a huge jump. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I bet. What's funny about that though is the connection I kind of noticed here. So, it's intermediate level for you, even though it's just a full. But the way that the gymnastics is attacking it is it's like round off back handspring full, round off back handspring full. Okay, it's good enough. Now we're gonna go to advanced. It's gonna be round off back handspring full in, and they're like, what?
It really, it's weird.
The tricking side of it is like we don't do that until we're ready. Like I don't like you guys are prepping the full in at intermediate level, and we don't prep the full in until we're ready to full in. Like you guys are just secretly ingraining that in them versus us. We're so much more focused on like the transitions and the flow of the tricks, because how we can make our overall combo, and then much less about our power move all by itself, which I think some people do, but especially when you're starting out and you're not even an intermediate yet, you cannot do that because you just don't have the control and the strength and the understanding to put the things in the right time, like timing. You can't do it. You just can't work power yet. But yeah, intermediate. Go ahead.
Sorry. It's like one thing for us, and I feel like it's almost like a weird coach's mindset or secret of when we start teaching right from the beginning, we're already looking like 3 to 5 steps ahead of like, all right, if they can start working on this now and I can start working on it this specific way, it's going to lead into doing this later on. So why not take the time now, kind of quote unquote work more or starting to perfect what it looks like. So then when we move into doing double flips, full ins, and all that kind of stuff, they'll just sort of start to innately understand what's going on instead of us having to re-explain how to do the skill when they start to get more advanced. We're like, all right, I'm going to really take my time so you understand what this is exactly. So when we start doing those big skills, you're just like, oh, it's a little bit easier to get now.
That's totally right. Yeah. Like when I was teaching some like privates and stuff, and I'll be like teaching them backflips. Like I feel like when they teach themselves, they do the backflip and they're like, oh, I did it. And I'm like, No, you didn't. Because if you do it that way, you're going to create this bad habits and you're not going to be able to learn a full, or you're not going to be able to double back. You're going to have to completely take a step back. And I don't think people are mentally prepared to take steps back, which is something else we're going to talk about later on.
So what's like more transitioning from beginner to intermediate? Like, what do you guys really focus on then?
The biggest thing is getting rid of that choppy flow for good. And you never really the training out that choppy flow never really goes away, because what's happening is you're constantly leveling up your tricks. So intermediate is probably, you better have a strong cheat 9 by now. Cheat 9 is like, if you can't cheat, like even advanced levels do cheat 9. It's a very like, it's a trick that gives you that awareness back. So you're doing like a big trick, you're transitioning, doing these crazy stuff, and then you're like cheat 9 and you're like, I just gained all my awareness back. Now I'm comfortable. Now I'm vertical. Now I'm in a place that I'm strong in. And then you go into, you can either hook, or if you're strong enough in your cheat 9, you can do another vanish. You can do a swing. You can do something from that position. So having that really, really strong cheat 9 is a must in intermediate. And then you have to start having dubs on floor, because you should have been working dubs in beginner level. You don't necessarily have to land them in beginner, but through intermediate, you should be landing dubs on tramp and then taking them to floor. Because if you've been doing like a cart full during beginner level and cart full swipes, then bringing the dub to the floor should not be that difficult. You understand how to get height. You understand how to make your variation look nice. And then I'd say intermediate though is all about learning the variants, single full variants, from corks and varying your kicks, maybe adding kicks. So not just doing tornado vanish 9, but doing fei long vanish 9 fei long, or D-leg punch back flash, stuff like that. And then you can probably start dabbling in the stances, just basic stances, switching up things like swings into vanishes. So maybe doing like cork vanish 9 instead of cork swing gainer, things like that. And then you can probably start touching on cheat 9 hypers and maybe cheat 10s. Cheat 10s starts breaking into advanced if you're doing that. But you should also be doing double corks, and you should probably, by the end of intermediate, start working into the double cork variants, because that is like, you've been training at the beginning of the intermediate, you've been training the single cork variations and the single full variations. And so you should have that fall time, because if you can full swipe and then you do a full D-leg, full swipe lands in hyper, full D-leg lands in complete. So if you're doing a full D-leg, you should have fall time. So you should do, if you can do full D-leg hyper, then you could potentially send a full D-leg twist. But it's stuff that it's like, you're comfortable enough to send things now at intermediate level. You don't have to land them, but you're going to hit feet first. You're going to know how to bail it. And you should be landing those things on tramp also. Like your tramp game should start be really leveling up, and you should be able to do triple fulls on tramp, or at least send triple fulls on tramp if you're also doing double full variations. Because what we say here is that the variation equals the twist. So if you're on tramp and you can do full D-leg twist, or double full D-leg or double full D-leg, then you could do a double full D-leg twist like timer that you can like kind of like start hypering it, or you can like turn your head and be like, oh, that's where the twist would go. Then you do a double full without the D-leg. Now you have all this height, and then you can add your twists. So you should be able to send it when you take away the variations. And that's really what intermediate's all about. But that's like I think intermediate is the funnest level to be at. It's the most fun, like doing working on that kind of stuff, and like you feel like you're getting good. You're like I really passed like that big hump, and now you're really pushing into the enjoyable tricks. Probably I didn't mention like raise and TDR, which are like kind of messed up axis. Everyone kind of deals with those differently, but I think that having like a TDR double cork is probably is definitely intermediate level, and then raise double cork is like end of intermediate level, probably the beginning of advanced level. Raise is much harder to get power from than TDR is, because you don't have that touchdown, and it's much more like a G switch dub. And I think that the swing chains into dub are definitely advanced level.
True.
So advanced level for you, what kind of like, when do you guys get into full in? Is that in advanced?
I would say that's working on sort of getting towards advance, or maybe a little bit later into advanced, because like by advance you're doing probably closer to 2.5 back 2.5 twists, usually
Okay.
front full, front Rudy, or you're doing front layout punch, front full on floor. You're doing
Nice.
you're doing like souk lays, or you're doing your Chenko lay, or maybe you're even working on twisting your vaults instead. Bars, you're doing like double backs off bar. You're starting to work on release moves. Beam, you're starting to do actual like back tuck or aerial. Like those you're really getting advanced. Like you're really getting up there in your
So
level. That's like a
the beginning of advanced is like that fun area for you where they actually feel like now they're pushing. Okay, sweet.
because that's when you're doing like double backs on floor. Like you're doing like the really cool skills that everybody wants to see and everybody wants to be able to do. Because I mean, that's the cool stuff, man. I loved flipping big and just doing big flips because it's just you feel like you're flying for like 5 seconds, even though it's probably maybe a second and a half, 2 seconds that you're leaving the floor and coming back. It's such a great feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it should be just that like state of meditation where it's like, I don't care how much work I have to do at home. I don't care about work tomorrow. I'm upside down and I'm going to die if I don't pay attention. So your mind's so clear and you're
Yep.
focusing on the one thing. And it's not like a level of like, I need to focus on this. Your brain just shuts everything else off and you're like, I'm in the zone. This is what I'm doing. And it's pretty sweet like that.
Oh, I love it. But yeah, getting to that advanced, I mean, it takes a lot more dedication though, because now it's not just strength and flexibility. By then you're really strong. And you're usually really flexible, or at least pretty flexible.
They do like all types of conditioning in that, right? Like that's not entirely a byproduct of what you're doing, but it is a little bit. But they're doing like crazy workouts too, right?
Oh yeah, when we do conditioning for it, especially when you're transitioning into advanced, you tend to start doing a little bit of weightlifting here and there and starting to incorporate that kind of stuff because it's just going to translate into more power, into more strength, especially for when you have to throw your body over the bar and re-catch it and then connect into another release move. I mean, that's huge. And being able to block high enough to have enough fall time to flip and twist off a vault or jump high enough on the beam and have more than enough body control to stay perfectly straight and not fall. I mean, you have to condition like crazy. It really, at that point, takes a bigger portion of your time of conditioning, being in the gym more hours a week to really practice these skills again. Because, like we said at the beginning, your basic movements transition into doing your bigger skills. And even at advanced, at least for gymnastics, we still touch back on doing some of those basics. Now, granted, your basics will evolve a little bit. Like, you're not just doing a cartwheel. You're not just doing a round off. Like, for them, a basic on floor, like if they're doing quote unquote like a cookie cutter routine, just they're working on their dance parts mainly and not doing like a full routine with their big tumbling skills. They'll just do like round off back handspring back layout and just make it like super high and just focus on getting the really big height off of it. And then they'll just do like front handspring front layout or just run front tuck. And like that's just a basic for them. Or like warming up on vault, they'll just do tuck souk or laid out souk and just that's their warm up.
Right. Like that's just their prep trick, just like a tornado would be. You just take out the 9 and put it in tornado for your combo. And then the girls, they do the conditioning hard too, or do they have to do it harder than the men do? Because they still kind of focus on explosive power.
Men focus more on the explosive power in my head because technically they still have some big tricks that women don't quite have, which they are also catching up to really fast, which is beyond amazing. They both condition a lot. I think men have to condition their upper body a little bit more just because more of their events are upper body focused. But I mean, the amount of conditioning that they probably do at least a day, I would assume is at least an hour a practice, 30 minutes at least minimum.
Yeah.
And that's just like basic stuff. That's not if they're doing 2-a-days where they're doing conditioning and basics for the morning practice or their first practice. And then their second practice, they're working on their big skills. Like then that's 3 hours of pretty much conditioning and just redoing your basics.
See, I think that's really, really good. I wish trickers had more time set aside in their open gyms to be able to do
Yeah.
stuff like that. But that's where it takes that discipline. It's like, okay, you get 2 hours at open gym, then that's when you work on those basics in your start, and then you work on your hard skills. And then afterwards, when you get home, you stretch and condition.
Yeah.
Or you can do it beforehand. But I don't like to do conditioning beforehand because when I start working out, I end up working out really hard. So I want to, I don't want to gas myself before the session. I want to do it after, or maybe I do it the day after if I get home late. But I just make sure to have days set aside where I am working out. But I think that trickers are too greedy. And so impatient with their level ups. And
Yeah.
like, for example, like I see people all the time doing like master scoot double cork, and they're crashing it over and over and over. And then I go up to them, I'm like, can you cork swipe or cork box? And they're like, oh, I've never tried. And I was like, can you on tramp? And they're like, I've never tried. I just got full and I got dub on tramp. And I was like, you should try. And then they try it, and then they get it, and it gives them, it's like the spot that they're opening and the spot that they're kind of crashing at or bailing at is during that last portion. Is during where you would throw your kick for your box cutter. Instead of throwing your kick, if you looked over your left shoulder, you'd be landing your double cork. And they're bailing at this point that they're uncomfortable in. And it's like they're rushing it, but it's like there's a skill you can do that gives you comfortable in that position. So stop skipping it. And I think that's something that the gymnastics does really well is they do the conditioning, but the trickers are too impatient, so they skip the conditioning and they rush their tricks and they rush their level ups, and they expect all these things to come from their training, but they're not training properly, and they think they are because they only see what you do at session. So if you're comparing yourself to a high level tricker, they're like, dude, he's just throwing triple corks. He's just doing all these big skills. And it's like, but you don't know what he does at home. You don't
Yeah.
know what he eats like. You don't know what he thinks about all day. I mean, he is probably breaking things down. He's probably breaking his own clips down. And you're just taking videos of your clips and posting them. You're not breaking it down, and you're not comparing your single cork to their double cork, And that's I think how you're going to transition from intermediate to advanced. Once you're in advanced, like it's very, very difficult to get to advanced. It's not complicated, but it's very difficult because in advanced, that's the point where you need to start doing those workouts, and you need to start doing more because I think a double cork is like, you can condition with tricking alone. Once you get past that starting point and you get that flexibility and strength, then you don't need more than that. You just trick. And then once you get to double corks and you're like playing with double cork variations, not combos, double cork variations in combos is advanced, but doing them all by themselves is intermediate. And if you can play with those, then it's very difficult to get past that point physically because that doesn't come naturally. The human body does not become that strong without working out and without pushing it past its limits. Because tricking does not make you necessarily physically stronger. It almost breaks you down, and that's why you're sore afterwards, and that's why you like your joints are sore. Like not your muscles. Like your muscles can get sore. Yes, your muscles can get stronger, but you're sore and you need to rest.
Yeah.
It's not like you can just you can't just necessarily foam roll it out. Like you can foam roll some of it out, but you gotta stretch your joints and you gotta move your joints and warm back up and go for a swim or a run or something to like loosen up again because there's a lot of swelling that happens after sessions. And if your body's not prepared,
it's just gonna break down more, and then it's hard to catch back up. Once you start to get injured, it's hard to bounce back right away.
100%. Yeah, so many people talk about that. Anybody who has any sort of hand in tricking for us is constantly talking about that nowadays. How much injuries set you back. So that's why it's like a new revolution right now. Is like people really trying to explain to the younger people and anyone who's trying to trick consistently is that like you cannot get injured. Like there are steps that we can take to learn new skills without crashing so hard. We can crash, we can fall, but like we don't want to slam,
Oh god, that hurts.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's the first point for the advances. Really, just really work out, really stretch. Because you're doing these mad skills that are going to take a really big toll on your body, and if you want to retain that level, you need to really push. And so yeah, this is the point where you're doing triples on floor. You're taking them from tramp to floor, and you're starting to combo all your hard tricks, all your intermediate tricks. So it's like, okay, you learn cheat 9, you learn cheat 9 hyper, you learn cheat 10, you learned your double cork variations. Okay, now put them together. If you can put them together, then you are advanced. If you can do double B twist in combos, you are advanced. If you can do dubs, you are advanced. Those are, but dubs is like beginning of advanced. You have to combo the dub to really be advanced, especially nowadays with when the levels are really picking up. And then yeah, one last thing I wanted to touch on for all of these levels before we get into like a little bit of a different talk is that don't lie to yourself through all of these, for gymnastics and for tricking, is like, you're telling yourself, you're like, oh, I have a good cheat 9. And then you try to cheat 9 hyper and you're like, why isn't it working? And they're like, your kick's not coming out. And you're like, oh, why isn't my kick coming out? It's because your cheat 9 sucks. You're telling yourself that it's good and it's not. And then you're like, okay, well, how's your 540 kick? And they're like, I skipped 540 kick. I didn't think I would need it for anything. It's like 540 doesn't really level up. Like, yeah, maybe there's double 9 and stuff. It's like, cheat 9 hyper is 540 kick with a twist before. And they're like, oh, shit.
Yeah,
you're right.
It's kind of like that point of like, be positive about yourself, kind of stay humble, but you have to be critical of what you're doing, because if you're not just going to level up super fast once you get to really being advanced. When you're wanting to do those bigger stuff, you have to understand how good your basics are. Because if they're not great, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, it's just an extra 360 or an extra 180 to your twist, and you just can't fathom doing that, all of a sudden you're like, what am I doing wrong? It's
right.
Being humble during the beginning and just not being like, oh, well, I landed it, it's good. It's like, no.
Yeah.
That's not.
And it's like what you said too, where you said, make sure your basics are good, but also know what your basics are. Like, so you walk into the session, you're like, okay, you should have a consistent warm up. Like, you don't walk into the session and you say like, okay, I'm going to work backside 12 today. And so then you're like, all right, so my warm up is going to be cheat 9, backside 9, and regato backside 9, cork vanish 9. No. Your warm-up should be the polar opposite of what you're training to make sure that you're not losing skills you had before or previously. I recently was working backside 12, and so I was working backside 12. I was working double Bs. I was working on vanishing out of really high-level kicks, trying to work on my cheat 10s and combos, making sure that I could go into snapu from anything. And I'm just trying to connect these things, and I was warming my sessions up with the base tricks of those. But what ended up happening is I went to my next session and I had a hard time doing G switch dub, which is my go-to. Like, that should be easy for me. And I was having a hard time doing those. And then it didn't take long for me to get it back, but I was just like so scared. I was like, dang, what if I didn't train G switch dub this session? What if I wasn't trying to do like these combos that ended with G switch dub? Like, I was working on combo starters. And so it was like, I made the combo starters hard. And I went to the combo ender and I was like, I'll just make it G switched up. And I was messing up on that part. And I was like, what? So, make sure that, so if you're doing like kicks, make sure you start your session with swings. It doesn't have to be a long time. Like, right now, what I'm doing is I'm starting every session. I just tried to do max cork swings, twice. So like, I usually hit 5 corks. I do it again. Maybe I hit 6. And then I go to G switches and I usually one shot 8. And then I'm like, okay, now I'm good. Let's go on to what I was going to trick today. Just touch on them, don't let your body forget those tricks, or, something you're like, next session, I want to work on tack full. So you work on tack full, like you do like 2 tack fulls. And then you're like, okay, now what was I here for? Double cork variations. Let's do it. Just don't take that entire time. There's so much time there. Don't just waste it all on one thing. And then that also helps you not lie to yourself, because if you're working on, I just want to say too, what I'm actually working on right now, which I think is gonna be super beneficial, is I am working on a sampler. I'm gonna put out one now, but next one I'm gonna work on is called One Shot. And what it's gonna be is just, what combos can I one shot? If I don't one shot it, it's not going to the sampler. It might be simple tricks. I'm hoping they're really clean, and I hope intricate stuff. But if I don't one shot it, it's not going in. And so that's going to really teach me. The reason I'm doing this is to prep for battles. Tricking battles are super cool. And I think in gymnastics, it's like really cool. Like, they're essentially doing battles all the time. They have to stick to tricks. They have to, like, maybe they can full, but they're not going to compete that, And so it's like, because if you fall in a battle, that's
it's like that in competition for us. You fall you're more likely to do well, and you're gonna it's gonna cost you. It's gonna cost you quite a bit.
Yeah.
After front handspring, double pike, half out on vault, how they do the Brett Schneider on high bar, how women do back layout, step out, just casually on beam, or how
those are all competed like skills in Olympics. They're not just, it's not like they're like, oh, I did this on floor and I have it on tape. They're like, they competed that, right?
Yeah, they competed, which is just insane. I mean, I could not imagine being in front of thousands or millions of people, especially even like at the Olympics. And the pressure's on. Like, you don't land that, everybody sees it. And you're like, oh man. And that would be like the worst feeling, because you're representing your country. And I mean, at elite level, you're usually starting to work on competing internationally, and you have to be really on top of your game, and you have to be doing those big skills, and you have to be doing them cleanly. Because if you're not, they're not going to choose you to be on the team. You have to be clean, and you have to be good. And that is hard to do both.
I think that's really cool. Like you're like, I know I'm competing this skill. So they take that step back and they're like, all right, this is what I'm focusing on. And they can just sit there and focus on that. And I think that trickers can take some from that. It's like, make sure you're tricking in giving everything the necessarily time that it needs. You're like, okay, well, this week I'm going to focus on swing moves. Next week, I'm going to work on vanish tricks. Next week, I'm going to work on stances. Like, you've got to take that. You can't be like, this session, I'm going to do this. Next session, I'm going to, like, you can do that, but you better have a strong base to be able to do that. And then once you've kind of like, kind of exhausted those options, or you're not necessarily entertained by that anymore, then you need to work on like a level up form of it, or like a consistency for, like, trickers are so bad at drilling. Like I said before, it's like, drill that box cutter before you get that double cork, and they don't want to do it.
Nope. Because they want to rush and try to get the big skill. And that's like one thing where my coach really instilled in us, was doing certain days were basic days. Certain days you just did basics. You kind of touched base a little bit on some of the bigger skills that you were working on. And then the other days during the week, so it was like 3 days were more basic days, 3 days were more big skill days. So it wasn't just every day you're doing basics, every day you're doing big skills. Like, you had to manage your time better, so you didn't just break down, and so you could focus on fine tuning those little things here and there for your big skills. And it just opens up so many more doors so much quicker if you can do it that way.
I think that would help trickers have a lot more fun too. Like, they're always like pushing, and it's like, if you like, recently I've been pushing too hard, which is why I'm making that one shot sampler, because if you are pushing and just falling over and over again, you're like, geez, I just want this. I want it to be this, and I don't want anything else. It's like, but you have to be willing to take the days, to work those basics. And you're like, dang, I'm so good at tricking. Like, you just have to, you take, it's like, if I'm falling for 2 hours straight and I land one thing, you feel like crap, even though like it's like, even though you were literally pushing like triple cork combos the whole time, you were doing like backside 12 vanish 10 combos, and it's like, you just weren't landing that end move. You've got to remember, you landed all those moves leading up
beforehand,
to it, and you got to remember that, but it just doesn't feel the same. So you got to take other sessions too, where you're like, just destroy it,
Oh yeah, because you don't want to hit that burnout.
Right, exactly. And you gotta enjoy that. You're like, I'm gonna do the fattest cheat 9, vanish 10, sideswipe, TDR, double cork, D-leg. Like, okay, easy. Like, it wasn't a triple cork. There wasn't a snapu after the cheat 10. Like, to me, that's like a level that's like, okay, I could potentially one-shot that. Then, but then you land it and you're like, that is such a close, jump to the next stage. And I just like, you realize how like, you like look around and you're like, dang, not many people can do that. But like, to me, that was easy, So you just gotta, and like, even if you're at a beginning level, you gotta look around and be like, dude, trickers are few and far between. I am a different breed of human doing this stuff that is amazing, and it's difficult. And whatever you can land, sometimes you just got to take a second and like land a few things and like tell yourself, like, I remember when I couldn't do this, and now I can. That's sweet. So
yeah, you got to rebuild that confidence. Confidence is key. It really is.
Right. And that goes back to, the confidence is just another word for being comfortable, doing that
True.
box cutter, getting comfortable. Now you're confident in that area. Now you double cork, it's that same,
Mhm.
it's the same thing. Comfortable and confidence is the same thing. And that's what it's all about.
All right, so then after going above advanced, is there any more key points we just think about we want to touch on?
The only things maybe is just once you're doing like triple cork combos and things like that where you or like double cork variant combos and cheat tens into snapus and working the stances like cork box cutter front swing side swipe GMS, like things where you're doing really complicated transitions and stuff like that. It's like, then where do you go?
Yeah.
I think that it's just really important, especially for the trickers, to not necessarily push for that more advanced and more advanced, because I think that once you're in the advanced state, it's like you really have to focus on maintaining what you have at first, especially when you first get into it and you're like, it's not the same. Like when you land a
Agreed.
triple cork, you cannot replicate that like you could replicate single cork. It's not like it takes like a different kind of power, and you cannot train power every single time, which is also
Nope.
why it's really cool to go back to the basics. And I think that I don't know because I haven't gotten past where I'm at right now. I have landed snatch cannon, I have landed triple core combos, but I think that getting more advanced, like, I want to do what Shosei's doing. I want to do
Oh man.
quad cork combos. I want to
Woo.
do snatch cannon combos from swing chains. Like, that's insane stuff. He is just doing, all sorts of different flips that are like the pseudo dubs and stuff like that. Like, I want to play with that stuff. But I don't know how much I can, because once I start playing in these different areas, I'm going to lose these other tricks that are more important to me. So I think you can't, once you're in this really, really high level advanced, you can't spread yourself thin. Basics is a different story. You can really max out your basics and get super good transitions, all your stances, everything,
Yeah.
and get really creative, and then also use your power tricks like the triple corks, dub variations, short cutter front swings, all these other things. And but you got to be careful pushing it into the other levels because the potential to lose things is much
Is
higher, because you
yeah.
have to maintain that strength and the understanding of the skills. But I think that it's the same as going from beginner to intermediate. Like, this advanced level is a form of beginner. It's like a whole new. It's like you just went Super Saiyan, and you're like I just broke through this thing, and now I'm here. But like,
Yeah.
if I don't maintain my strength, I'm going to go back to normal. And but you got to remember that there's more than Super Saiyan. There are levels past.
Yep.
It's like, but then how do you do that? And you can't, it's hard to explain other than just it's going to come to you. Like, you just keep doing what you're doing, and over time you will get comfortable and you get stronger, or you won't. I mean, but
Yeah.
you got to be, it's a level that you don't have a lot of control over. You get to play at it, and you got to maintain it, and if more comes, more comes. But keep leveling up your tramp tricks. For me, doing the tumbling skills, so maybe branching out and touching on other forms of movement
Yeah.
could
That can
be a
help.
really good, yeah. So all that kind of stuff is gonna, just try to find something that gives you that bump, and that works at
Yep.
all levels too. That's not just at advanced either. So
No.
yeah,
Yeah. I agree.
I think that's pretty much it.
Don't forget to follow our socials at Zidane Cloud on Instagram for me, Sean.
And CHRISPY_TRIX. That's Crispy Tricks on Instagram. And I also have another YouTube channel, Trix Fix, TRIX space FIX, for more tutorials and other things.
And we'll see you guys next time.